The scream pierced the Kansas heat like a dagger, and Caleb Rohr heard it before he saw her. As soon as he reached the low, a young woman was hanging upside down from a strong limb on a ridge outside of Dodge City, where the plains gave way to a little cottonwood grove. She was yelling at the empty sky as if it could blush for her. Her dress had dropped to her waist, her wrists tied behind her back, her ankles chained with rope, and dust stuck to her white beneath everything. Caleb's horse snorted when he stopped so forcefully. He just gazed, motionless, for 2 whole heartbeats. By the unexpected, blatant vista he hadn't seen since his wife passed away 8 summers prior, as soon as the girl saw his eyelids close, she was overcome with shame. "Avoid looking down there. That is not permitted." Her voice cracked as she snapped. With his jaw clenched, Caleb blinked and forced his eyes to meet hers. She appeared to be around 22 years old, sunburnt, freckled, and enraged that her rescue had seen her shame. With his boots thudding onto parched grass, he swung down and drew his knife. It was a rough, cowboy-made rope that was tied quickly and intended to cause pain. Despite cutting the knot, Caleb did not let go of her. Steady as a fence pillar, he grasped her hips with one arm before carefully lowering her to the ground. She staggered, picked up the skirt that had dropped, and pulled it down as if fabric could make up for what he had witnessed. Deep hoof prints and pulled grass revealed a battle behind her. Out here, far from town, someone had messed with her. Between the trees, a shadow shifted. A man wearing a constable's star that glowed too brightly in the sun emerged. Silas Crow grinned as if he were the owner of Maggie's breath. "She is being detained." He held up a folded piece of paper and stated, "I." Maggie recoiled at Dodge City's command. Caleb's gut churned as he read the ink from his position. Although it was a warrant, the name on it was incorrect. The signature appeared to be a drunken man's scratch, and the date was smeared. Beside him, Caleb sensed Maggie shaking. Additionally, he sensed a deeper, growing anger at the ease with which a badge may be turned into a weapon. Silas lowered his voice and leaned in closer. He said, "You saw too much, rancher. Now you either hand her over or you ride back to your lonely house and keep your mouth shut." Caleb gave Maggie a look. Even though her eyes were watery, she wasn't pleading. They were challenging him to act honorably. He may bring her to town, locate the actual sheriff, and attempt to prevail through legal means. Alternatively, he could resolve the matter here, where nobody would witness his next move. Will Dodge City hail Caleb as a hero or hang him if he defies the law to save her? When Silas Crow was done talking, Caleb remained motionless. The grassland became still, and when even the wind seems to pay attention, it does so just before trouble arises. Maggie was so close that Caleb could sense her trembling, and that in and of itself told him more than any warrant could. He took another lengthy, thoughtful look at the page. Similar to an elderly man reading a fence line. "It's funny," Caleb remarked calmly, almost amicably. "In my 20 years of riding in this county, I have never witnessed a girl being strapped upside down at the beginning of a legitimate arrest." Silas grinned more broadly. He explained it's known as resisting. "She bolted. I managed to catch her." Maggie gave a brief, half-angry, half-disbelieving cowboy love story giggle. "I stumbled," she said. "To teach me a lesson, he bound me." With cold, piercing gaze, Silas turned to face her. "Be careful, girl," he cautioned. "That kind of talk can exacerbate the situation." Something twisted in Caleb's chest. It wasn't yet wrath. It was the depressing sensation a guy experiences after realizing he has allowed the world to manipulate him for too long. He recalled how peaceful his home had been since his wife had left 8 summers ago. He recalled how simple it had been to keep to himself and avoid problems rather than deal with them. Silas moved in close enough for Caleb to smell cheap tobacco and perspiration. "You can still walk away," Silas murmured. "Take your horse, take your pride, and leave her to the law." Caleb glanced back at Maggie. Her hair was twisted from the rope, her clothing was ripped at the hem, and dust was on her knees. Nevertheless, she dared Silas to touch her once more while standing erect and raising her chin. Caleb chuckled to himself. "Ma'am," he addressed Maggie, she sneered, "you always get arrested like this, in spite of herself. Only on days ending and why?" Silas frowned. "Enough," he yelled. He grabbed Maggie's arm. Caleb moved more quickly than he had in a long time. With one hand out, he moved in between them. Just halting, not hitting. With his fingers just millimeters from her sleeve, Silas froze. Don't, Caleb muttered. The word, Western stories, was powerful. Silas looked at Caleb's hand, then back to his face. You put hands on an officer, Silas stated in a tense voice. That's prison, rancher. Caleb gave a nod. Maybe, he replied. Or maybe it's the last mistake you ever make. Sulu's smile disappeared from his face. It was replaced with something cruel and harmful that he changed his position and moved his hand in the direction of his pistol. At that point, everything shifted from being about the law to being about survival. Was Caleb going to breach a boundary from which he would never be able to return? Silas's hand seemed to have a mind of its own as it lingered close to his gun. Caleb spoke softly. The manner in which you converse with an anxious horse. He responded, you reach for iron, constable, and somebody's going to get buried out here. Silas laughed dryly. Rancher, that poses a threat. Caleb gave a shrug. It's a forecast. Behind him, Maggie gulped hard and told him stories about the Old West. Her shallow, rapid breathing was audible to Caleb, who detested that she had to experience dread in this way. In an attempt to draw a distinct line on Caleb's hip where his own pistol was, Silas moved a single step to the side. Like a fence that would not open, Caleb matched him, remaining between Silas and Maggie. Silas's gaze darted down once more. Then he made a cunning little move, which is what nice men do when they believe they are more intelligent than everyone else. He released the warrant paper as if it had accidentally slipped out of his hands. Silas attacked, not with the rifle but with his shoulder, slamming into Caleb's chest and attempting to push him backward into Maggie as Caleb's eyes briefly closed. Caleb staggered one step, his boots slipping as dust leaped off the dry grass. Old ranch strength then took control. Caleb firmly pushed back while planting his heels that Silas's hat blew off and spun like a sick joke as he lost his equilibrium. After gasping, Maggie thoughtlessly kicked Silas's dropped hat aside. It rolled into a thorny weed patch. At that, Caleb nearly grinned. Silas's face flushed when he saw it, despite his racing heart. You little witch, he yelled at Maggie. He swung his arm in her direction. It was more akin to a slap intended to correct her than a punch. In midair, Caleb grabbed Silas's wrist. The hold was firm. Just final, not cruel. Silas attempted to break away. Caleb persisted. Silas reached down for his rifle with his other hand. That was the actual action. The one that meant death was that one. Without thinking, Caleb responded as he quickly and sharply pulled Silas's wrist inward, causing him to grunt like a hog hitting a fence. The constable opened his fingers. The message was plain, but his revolver remained in its holster. He could be stopped by Caleb. For the first time, Silas appeared uncertain as he withdrew, his eyes suddenly wide. Then he grinned once more, but it was an unfriendly Wild West love story. It was the grin of a man who was skilled at ruining your life in court. You just touched the law, Silas remarked. And in Dodge City, I'll make you pay for it. With a voice more steady than her hands, Maggie moved up behind Caleb. She answered, He's not the law. He has a star and is a bully. As he gazed at Silas, Caleb came to a realization. There were other people with this constable. He is unlike any other man. There would be another pair of eyes, possibly another gun, somewhere nearby, concealed by the long grass or woods. Go ahead and subscribe if you're enjoying this narrative so far. You wouldn't believe how much it benefits the channel. Now get a cup of tea, sit down with me, and let me know what time it is, where you are, and how you are listening. Because this rescue becomes a manhunt in the following breath due to a gunshot. Because a gun cocked behind the cottonwoods just as Caleb was about to discover who else was observing. When the gun clicked once again, closer this time, Caleb realized it was real. Smug as a man with a winning card, Silas raised his chin. Easy now, Silas remarked. You don't want to make this ugly. Palm out, Caleb said, carefully raising one hand. However, he remained close to Maggie. Who's back there? Calm on the outside, taut underneath, Caleb asked. From the cottonwoods came a harsh, laughing voice. Just keeping things fair. With a long gun casually lying on his shoulder, a man emerged. He was sunburnt, trim, and grinning as if this were amusement. Silas gave him a nod. Silas said, "That's my witness, sees everything. When a judge asks, the memory is very clear." Maggie reached into Caleb's sleeve with her fingers. Once more, Caleb sensed her terror, which was hot and acute. He bent his head slightly to speak in a whisper. He said, "When I say move, you run. Don't look back." Maggie gave a headshake. She muttered, "I'm not leaving you." At that, Caleb grinned a little. Silas cleared his throat even now. "Enough romance," he remarked. "Your hands are behind your back. Rancher." Caleb refused to comply. Rather, he moved forward slowly. Silas's eyes grew wide. The rifleman changed his position. Time was stretched thin. Maggie then let out a warning scream rather than one of terror. The rifleman had inserted his finger into the trigger guard. Caleb responded. A shot split the air as he sprang laterally, seizing Maggie and pulling her down. Above them, wood splintered. Birds burst out of the trees. Caleb tumbled, dropped to one knee, and reached for his revolver. He hadn't even considered it. His body was only aware of the close, crisp crack of a shot. The rifleman let out a shout. He dropped the rifle as if it burnt him once the bullet struck his hand. The .44 gave a single bark, his hand flushed, and the rifle struck the ground ahead of him. Terrified beyond belief, he gripped his wrist, staggered back, and disappeared into the brush. For a heartbeat, Silas froze. No one moved. Then there was a noise coming from the wide open plains. More than one horse's hooves are approaching quickly. Even Silas was uncomfortable with the timing, as evidenced by the twitch in his smile. Caleb continued to stare at him. "Your boys heard the shots, didn't they?" Caleb remarked. Silas's eyes darted to the sound, but he remained silent. That was answer enough. Grabbing Silas, Caleb drove him into the ground and pinned him there. He smashed the tin star in his fist after yanking the badge free. He threw it into the weeds after that. Then, with a voice like gravel, Caleb leaned in. "Tell them the truth in town, or I'll tell it for you." Caleb quickly got to his feet and faced Maggie. "Up now," he murmured. Maggie refrained from arguing. Maggie tightened her grip on Caleb as they clambered atop the horse. The hoofbeats grew louder behind them, and irate voices drifted across the air. The horse charged on as Caleb dug in his heels. They continued until they came upon Dodge City's initial structures. Behind them, the dust continued to rise like a storm that had picked up on their names. Maggie leaned in and spoke softly. "Caleb, what if they catch us before we reach town?" Caleb didn't turn around. All he did was keep the horse steady. "Then we don't let them take you," he replied. Maggie tightened her grip on his belt as she gulped. She said, "I never even told you my name." Caleb's mouth quivered as if he had nearly forgotten how to grin. "Maggie," he said. "I heard Silas say it." Then his expression hardened once more. "I haven't felt this awake since the day they put Sarah in the ground." He stated it simply, as if the truth didn't require embellishment. Caleb didn't slow down. Not until they got close enough to notice people's heads turning. With his chest heaving, Caleb perched high in the saddle and gazed towards Dodge City. It was like pulling a thorn from your own hand and discovering it had been there for years. Maggie, still trembling, moved closer behind him. And Caleb took the one action he ought to have taken right away. Caleb made sure his coat covered her by pulling it firmly around her shoulders. Like a man who at last remembered how to be good, not like a hero. "Thank you," she said. "Quiet now." After giving a nod, Caleb turned to face Dodge City, where the far-off bell had sounded like a warning. He declared, "We can't stay out here. If we do, he turns us into a story people tell wrong." Because of the rocky terrain and her increased anxiety, Maggie remained on the saddle and gripped his belt tightly. Caleb felt the consequences of his actions every mile he traveled towards town. He had engaged in combat with a constable. His pistol had been fired. He had prioritized a person over harmony. And that decision was louder than any gunshot for a widower who had led a cautious and silent life. Caleb slowed at the border of Dodge City. Out on a porch, two men stopped chewing and gazed. One of them peered at Maggie's ripped clothing and spat into the dust. Caleb held up a hand. "I'm only requesting some space. I'm not nasty or pleasant." A mother inside a wagon drew her child closer as it passed slowly like a funeral. Shamed, Maggie tried to crawl back against her like a blanket while lowering her eyes. Caleb curved his body and adjusted in the horse to keep her from reaching their stares. He only spoke poorly about her. "Maintain an elevated chin. You didn't make a mistake." Maggie exhaled and gave a single nod. "That constable again?" A man by the hitching rail grumbled. Caleb looked at him sharply. He inquired, "The sheriff is where?" Maggie leaned in, observing the guys on the street, the porch shadows, and the way people observed newcomers from a distance as if they were guests in danger. She questioned, "Do you think they'll believe us?" Caleb exhaled. "I don't know," he replied. "But I know what happens when good people keep walking away." He had previously witnessed it in little villages that pretended nothing was going on and on desolate sections of trails. A bully gains courage. A good man wears out. Additionally, a terrible badge wins the first time. Everyone gains the ability to turn away. Maggie forced her words out even though it trembled. "I'm done if they don't believe me," she declared. Caleb slightly cocked his head to look directly into her eyes. He added, "Then we make them believe. And I'll stay at your side even if they still refuse." Not the dust and fist back in the cottonwoods, but that was the true battle. Choosing who you are when it would be easier to remain silent was the true struggle. For 8 summers, Caleb had been silent. It was strength, he had persuaded himself. However, defending Maggie revealed the truth to him. Sometimes being silent is just being afraid to wear a nice clothing. This section is for you if you've ever experienced a moment when you sensed something wasn't right but chose to remain quiet in order to keep things easy. If the law appeared legitimate but your instincts told you it was corrupt, what would you do? Would you take the chance of making things right, or would you just stand there grinning? Maggie turned to face Caleb, and when she glanced back at him, something had changed in her eyes. Trust is more than gratitude. And perhaps the initial spark of love. The type that appears when 2 individuals weather the same storm together. To confront whatever was ahead, they rode into town. They were tired of being pushed, not because they were courageous. Tap, like, if this story truly resonates with you. You wouldn't believe how much it helps. And to ensure you don't miss the next one, subscribe to the channel if you want more heartfelt frontier stories like this one. I want to leave you with this question now. Will the town defend Caleb when he enters Dodge City and exposes the truth, or will it defend the badge that attempted to destroy a young person?